Well, Tudor, as you know, there is a rise in antisemitism around the world, especially in different parts of the world. And you have to remember why Satan despises the Jewish people. It is because that it was the natural seed of Abraham, the Hebrew people, later known as the Jewish people, that gave us the Torah, the prophets of the Bible, the apostles of the New Testament, and of course Mary, who was a Jewish woman herself, gave birth to the Messiah. And so the fact that the redemption of mankind came through the nation of Israel and the birth of Christ gives reason for Satan to be so angry in these last days toward the Jewish people. Another part that I want to say is that God has a covenant concerning the land of Israel with the Jewish people. And once again, Satan has always tried to disrupt the covenants of God. Now, he's never been successful, but he does make an attempt to do so. Now, when it comes to replacement theology, this started many, many centuries ago. And so the teaching emerged that the church had replaced the nation of Israel, the Christians had replaced the Jewish people, and that Jerusalem was only a picture of the church. Now, you have to remember that when this theory was promoted in hundreds of years ago, there was no nation of Israel. The Jewish people had been scattered to the nations of the world. The temple had been destroyed in Jerusalem, and Gentile nations were controlling what was called Palestine. Again, it was the early nation of Israel. And so in the eyes of so many Christians, there was no biblical basis for there to be an Israel or Jewish state or whatever the case may be. Now, replacement theology is not biblical, and Romans chapter 11 is the key. In Romans chapter 11, Paul talks about two olive trees, a natural tree, which is Israel, and a wild tree, which is the Gentile branch. So there's the tree of Israel, the tree of the Gentiles. Paul said that Israel fell into unbelief, and God broke some of the branches off and grafted in Gentile branches into the natural tree of Israel. And this is a picture of how that the Hebrew people, the religious crowd, many of them rejected Jesus' ministry. And so in the time of the Apostle Paul and Cornelius in the book of Acts, the Gentile nations, non-Jewish people, were grafted into the covenant. So the Gentiles began to accept the gospel of Jesus, and they still do to this day around the world. However, Paul said in Romans 11 that if the day would come that the Gentiles would fall into unbelief, God would graft Israel back in again. And that is actually what I see taking place. In the nation of Israel, many, some of them are Russian Jews, some of them are Jewish people that have lived in the land, especially the younger generation. Many of them are coming into faith that Jesus, Yeshua is his Hebrew name, is the Messiah. And this is going to continue throughout the last days. But the bottom line is that we must keep in mind that there are prophecies for the Jews that are still activated today. There's prophecies for the nation of Israel that's still activated today. There are prophecies for the Gentiles, for individuals, and there are specific prophecies for the church. Jesus said, upon this rock, the rock of him being the Son of God, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. So replacement theology is an incorrect teaching, because there is the natural seed of Abraham in Romans 11, but there's the spiritual seed of Abraham, which is the church. God's promises for Israel are earthly. God's promises for the church are heavenly. And so we will rule and reign with Christ for 1,000 years in the future. So it's important for us to understand that Israel is Israel. The Jewish people who are Jewish people are the natural seed of Abraham. But we who are believers, who believe in Yeshua, in Jesus Christ, we are the spiritual seed of Abraham.
Alpha.